Accio review. I have no wand or review to bring, but we're going to talk about the Crimes of Grindelwald on Screen Junkies News. Hello, I'm Dan Murrell.
And I'm Roth Cornet. And Dan, this is a long-awaited movie by many of us, including myself, who is a big Harry Potter fan. This is one of my favorite unexplored stories and relationships in the lore. You are somewhat of a Potterhead.
I am a Potterhead. Yeah. I read all the books. I own all the books. I saw all the movies. I own all the movies. So I would say that I am a healthy Harry Potter fan.
I would count you as a very healthy Harry Potter fan. So what did you think as such?
Here's what I'll say. The first Fantastic Beasts movie, I was kind of fairly neutral on. I just felt like it was okay. When I heard that they were sort of backdoor, making these Fantastic Beasts movies into prequels to the Harry Potter films, I thought it could go a couple of different ways. I was intrigued because I agree, this whole idea of Grindelwald and Dumbledore. You have Jude Law joining the cast as Dumbledore, Johnny Depp, obviously Grindelwald, revealed at the end of the last movie. I was like, okay, there's a kernel of a good idea there, and it might be interesting to delve into that story. This movie did not work for me. It's so weird. You see this in so many of the franchise movies, and if I'm being honest, a lot of them are made by Warner Brothers, as this movie was. This is packed with information, just scene upon scene upon scene upon scene upon scene of plot, all adding onto each other, but it doesn't tell a story. And I know that sounds weird, but there's no connective tissue really to anything that goes on in this movie. It's all over the place. The characters are, you were introduced to some of the characters in the last film, and this film pretty much carries on that characterization that you got the last time. The new characters are introduced briefly, if at all. And then it's just an escalating series of seemingly to me randomly ordered scenes of just stuff happening with little to no explanation, and then it ends. It just felt like, it didn't feel like the movie. The best movies, you can have a very plot-heavy movie, but at their best, they're telling a story. The overall arc of the movie is a story. Every Harry Potter film is a piece of the larger story, especially as you got toward the end. But all of those films also, in and of themselves, had a beginning, a middle, and an end. They had a structure to them. They had character arcs inside of them that made them feel like complete films. This felt like J.K. Rowling vomiting 400 pieces of information onto the screen with little regard to any direction or structure or really logic. And by the end of it, it was, if I'm being honest, it was a chore for me to sit through this movie. And by the end of it, I was just kind of glad that it was over.
So Dan loved it, as you can see. So let me set the stage a little bit for myself. The first Fantastic Beasts movie, I enjoyed because I enjoy this world, because I enjoy the wizarding world and I enjoy the whimsy of it and the magic. Dan Fogler was a favorite of mine. So there were things about it that I appreciated, but on the whole, it didn't even come close to touching the magic of Harry Potter. That said, because there are very few franchises that I would say that I'm not able to be objective about. It's my job. I will say this. The wizarding world is probably the only one where it's very difficult for me to separate my appreciation as a fan and my critical eye. So as such, and I'm just putting that out there, as such, I enjoy being immersed in this world. We've seen in the trailers that we do return to Hogwarts. I enjoy being back in this world. I enjoy connecting back with Dumbledore. I enjoy the introduction of Grindelwald as himself. And I will say that what I think the film does is introduce a lot of thematics in this world. It touches back on characters that if you're a big Harry Potter fan, you will be familiar with. It touches into the lore of that. It takes for granted that a much more casual fan will be able to follow certain things. I think there will be a number of relationships, including the one between Dumbledore and Grindelwald, that if you're not already aware of the dynamics between them, then it's certainly not helping you. It doesn't explore it in the kind of depth that will help a new viewer understand it, but I am aware, and therefore it meant something to me.
But I think there's exploration left to be had. I actually liked I liked how they explored that. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. That's all I was gonna say. Is I think there's two different kinds of characterization, and that one was one that I'm just like, I feel like there's stuff ahead of you on that end, and there were some characters though. One I'll talk about in a second that I felt like the movie did not do that with, to its detriment.
Sure, but what I'm saying is, yes, this is a movie that feels very much. It's not even like a middle movie because yes, it does pick up from Fantastic Beasts, but it's really driving somewhere brand new, and it's driving somewhere new that's very, very much connected to the world of Harry Potter. There are two twists. One is in a character turn, and one is in a character reveal that I think are going to have everybody talking, and you're either going to buy into these twists or you're not. And we can get into that in the spoiler review because I think that has a big impact on how you feel about the movie. That said, I think that there's an alarming number of coincidences that happen in order to bring these characters together. But once they are, the visuals are used beautifully, the whimsy is back, the sense of majesty in the world, the way magic is used is explored well. The creatures, the fantastic beasts themselves are, in my opinion, very beautifully rendered and arresting. But it does feel like J.K. Rowling is a novelist in which you have a ton of room to get into the internal monologue of a character, to get into the inner life, to explore themes and nuance and depth. But in a screenplay, you don't. And I think she's a genius, but I think she has struggled in the last two films, but particularly in this one, where it probably has some greater meaning to her, to adapt to this format.
I think J.K. Rowling has some issues editing herself, which is, if you look at the Harry Potter book series, you'll see that they went from that to that to that to by the end to this, and I think even the hardcore fans, particularly with Deathly Hallows, thought that maybe there could have been some excising done, some editing done to some of those later books, and this is what that movie felt like to me. It felt like J.K. Rowling had a massive amount of information and things that she wanted to put in this film. And instead of sort of going through and structuring it and figuring out how to lay it into a cohesive narrative and a story, she just threw it all into this movie. And so the movie's just like there's no tempo to it, there's no tone, there's no, the characters get scenes, but there's no overarching storyline really. There are a couple of character turns that have their roots throughout, but mainly I just felt like it was just a random series of events just sort of chopped together all the way to the end.
There's a MacGuffin in the movie. There's a MacGuffin in the movie, and there's a search for a reveal in the movie, a piece of information. So there's a physical MacGuffin in the movie, and then there's sort of a metaphorical MacGuffin in the search for this piece of information about a very important character.
Yeah.
So those are the things that are driving it forward, and Dumbledore's desire to get to those things, and the way that and it's very Dumbledore-like, the way that he manipulates circumstances to get what he wants, while still somehow being loving and wise, is very Dumbledore. And the question of persuasion, she's layering in, and this is where I do agree it gets a little muddled. She's layering a lot of allusions to our modern day life, our modern day politics, how and when we fall for certain things, how and when we decide to follow certain leaders and certain ideologies is a little bit later in there. And when she was writing Harry Potter, she was hearkening back to a time gone past. She was alluding to Hitler. And Nazism, and I think she's trying to reconcile herself imperfectly, because it's impossible to do in the moment, to the times we're in, and still tell this magical story with all of this whimsy and touch on this mythology that she introduced in the previous worlds. And for me, I was taken enough by the world and by the characters, and by sort of the epic scope of what they're dealing with, that I enjoyed the film. I don't think it's perfect. I do agree with you that it's muddled, and I do agree with you that she's trying to do too many things at once, and that it reads as a piece of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah, this was not for me. Ironically, for a film series that's about magic, this lost all sense of magic and whimsy for me. I didn't get any, like, magic now, it seems in these movies, is just a drudgery.
I mean,
There's
Fantastic Beasts
nothing.
is literally darker than Harry Potter.
But I mean, it is on screen. If you
On
take the
screen.
light meter in, it's
That's what I'm
100%
saying.
dark, and that's David Yates' style.
That's David Yates' style, but it is literally darker.
But the idea that magic is this wonderful thing, I don't feel that anymore.
because you don't have that character except for Dan Fogler. You don't have Harry. We saw through the eyes of Harry as he was introduced to this world.
Yes.
And he was going, that moment, you remember in The Goblet of Fire when he says, I love magic, and you're
Yes.
feeling the same thing. We don't have that here because it is far more grim.
I agree. It is far more grim, but I mean that for me, if it were in service of a greater story, that's fine. It wasn't for me. It was just a drudgery. It was just a slog, and by the end, it doesn't get you to anywhere except for. And here's what the next one's going to be. There's nothing to sort of tie it all together. It's like she has in her head this just long Subway sandwich, and she just sort of randomly sliced whatever this movie is out of that sandwich and threw it out, and then now we've got the 3/5 of the sandwich left.
I feel like I know where it's going.
But ultimately yes. But this movie did not take me through any part of that journey in a meaningful way. It just felt like an obligatory section of what is not really mapped out into how this is going to work in installments. It's just what piece of the story can we tell in this film with no regard to actually making these films that make any sense in a narrative way.
I mean, I am not disagreeing with some of the structural problems. I legitimately think this could be problematic for folks to follow to some degree. I'll be honest, I didn't have trouble following it. I bumped on, I was held up and taken out a bit by some of the character turns, one in particular, and it wasn't, it actually, this will be a big discussion, it wasn't the reveal, which I still have questions and thoughts about. There's a character reveal. There is a character turn, a complete 180 in behavior of an established character that I had a lot of problems with, where I felt it was very out of character.
If the film had set that up better, that's kind of that turn, and I'm almost positive that turn for me in microcosm was my problem with the film. If the film had set that moment up more, I would have bought it. But the fact that the film set that up through a 2-minute scene 45 minutes earlier in the film that's not referred to again until the end when that character turn happens, like that really is my problem with the whole film, is that events happen but everything seems truncated because so much is stuffed into this movie that the characters aren't given room to breathe, the plot isn't given room to breathe, nothing really is. It's all just in service of just like, we have got to get all of this in the movie. And I think that J.K. Rowling has some wonderful ideas, and she creates and has created and continues to create very beautiful, magical, mystical worlds. My advice would be going forward, I think that she could use the help of perhaps a screenwriter, a co-writer, to guide her through the process of adapting all of the ideas she has in her head to the film format, because it's not the same as a book format. And I think
it's not.
It's probably, why, yes, in adapting the big books, there's stuff that's always lost, but there's a reason for that, because you have to lose some things in order for other things to breathe. And I just don't get the sense of that from this film. And I really wanted to like this, but this just was not my cup of tea. No, that was not a British thing. That's just a colloquialism. Yes.
So it's interesting, and we've had this happen a couple of times on different movies recently, where we're largely in alignment with the things that did or did not work about something, but we just land in a different feeling space about
different sides.
And so I agree with you. I think that I love J.K. Rowling. I really do. And I think she could use a hand in terms of adapting things and writing a screenplay that works for a larger audience. On the other hand, I agree with the kinetic nature of the film and sort of like the massive number of leaps in suspension of disbelief you have to take to believe that all of these characters happen to land in these same places. Key storylines are told very, very quickly.
And J.K. Rowling has a retconning problem, which we will talk about in a different review, I'm sure.
And there's a couple of retcons, and there's like sort of like you're following along with this one character, and then very quickly some exposition tells you what's going on, right? All of these you can understand is somebody that is a novelist that is now writing a screenplay, correct? Right? But for whatever reason, all of that aside, I just love being in this world. I just do. I just really love being in the world of magic, and I love being back with Dumbledore, and I love being back at Hogwarts, and I love finding new things to discover in magic, and I love Dan Fogler in this. He's the closest to our eye that can catch some of the joy and whimsy in magic. It's not as much as in the Harry Potter films, and I really, and this film more than the last, like Newt, because I like Newt set against these other characters. I feel like I understand him better. And the whole arc of the film for me, for him, is this idea of you have a person that truly believes I am not on any one side because I am on all sides. There are no monsters I cannot love. There is nothing that I cannot empathize with. And then he comes to the point where he realizes that choosing no side is choosing a side. And he must, in fact, definitively step into the side of right, because there is no way that this monster is available for him to love in the form of Grindelwald. So that was the arc that I felt was there. That was the whole arc of the story, but it's told in many fragments. It's true.
I wish I could have found that kind of depth in the movie. I did not. Roth wanted Potter more. Unfortunately, it was Potter less for me.
Okay. Well, I think if you're a really big fan of Harry Potter and these franchises, whether you enjoy it or not, or whether you sort of land where Dan did or where I did, I do think it's something that's going to be interesting for you to see and then talk about and dissect, because, man, there's some stuff in there.
There's a lot of stuff in there. The rare split decision from Roth and I on The Crimes of Grindelwald. It hits theaters on next Friday.
Next Friday. And
So-
you let us know what you think in the comments below once you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, stay tuned here to Screen Junkies News, where we will continue to break down all the latest releases, news, and everything else happening in the world of entertainment.